New reporting reveals a clinic in Fort Worth, Texas, performed 67 abortions in the 17 hours before the new heartbeat bill went into effect. The new law bans abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, making it one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. The Supreme Court voted 5-4 to deny an emergency appeal from abortion providers and others that sought to block enforcement of the law that went into effect Wednesday, according to The Guardian.
Team Rising is here to weigh in. Max Alvarez is the editor-in-chief of The Real News and host of the Working People podcast. And Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist, joins us as well. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
So Emily, it appears like the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade using the shadow docket. Is that what's going on here?
No, I actually don't think so. I mean, I understand the interpretation because the consequences of the ruling are, obviously almost banning abortion outright in Texas, which as pro-life person, I see it as a victory. But I don't think this actually is an indication. And there's actually some legal experts who have weighed in on this morning, and I expect we'll see it more and more as the day goes on, because they're very clear, like Alito is very clear in his ruling, that this is narrowly a procedural ruling, that it's actually not going to block any challenges on the state level, and it is not a ruling on the constitutionality of the law itself or on the underlying issue. So I think it may be fair to read this as an indication that when I think it's a Mississippi case, is litigated in front of the Supreme Court this fall, you may see people taking similar sides in the 5-4 breakdown. So I think it's fair to look at it like this, but to look at it like that. But I think I do think it's true that this is a procedural ruling that does have dramatic consequences in Texas itself. And it does mean that you will see more states start to follow what was described by one legal expert in Politico this morning as a, quote, evil genius mechanism for protecting the unborn. So I think you will see other states absolutely start to copy that kind of legislation, because it is a legal innovation the way that they did it, so that people, it's not that the state is blocking it, it's that they're empowering citizens to sue, to bring charges. It's a really interesting way of getting at the issue, and I think you will see it replicated elsewhere.
It'll be up to individual abortion clinics as to whether they go forward with it, and you could see an argument for why they would, because how are these citizens, what Kagan called bounty hunters, how are they going to get the evidence that it was 9 weeks or 10 weeks or 11 weeks or 5 weeks? Are they going to break in? Some of them will. Right. So I think some of them will break in to abortion clinics and try to seize, the confidential medical files of patients. But obviously that you can't break in and then bring that to court. So they're already protesting outside of clinics. So are they going to be surveilling people from their homes to the clinics and measuring kind of the size of their bump as they go in and then trying to sue based on that? So it's totally up in the air, because they're using this what they're calling a workaround to Roe. It's not really a workaround, because it's obviously overturning Roe. But what's your read on how Democrats ought to be responding to this?
I mean, my read is that they should have been responding to it a long time ago, right? I mean, I think that one of the kind of clear things from looking at this, right, as many other commentators have noted, right, is that in many ways and in many states, right, abortion has already become functionally unattainable, especially for low income and working class people, right? Whether that is because they have to travel to like the 1 or 2 abortion providing clinics in their state, but only can receive an abortion after like a 24-hour waiting period, which a lot of working folks cannot take, because they have to go back to work or whatever reason. There are a lot of existing restrictions in a number of states that have already functionally overturned Roe v. Wade, right? And I think that this is really the result of kind of a long, concerted, organized, and motivated, movement on the right to achieve, these victories for their side. Right? It is a persistent kind of movement that has resulted in the sort of restrictions that we're seeing now. Whereas I think on the Democratic left, a lot of the times people respond to it like once it's kind of already past the point of no return, right? I mean, I think that's my read on the kind of Supreme Court thing. I obviously bristle at the kind of, grossness of the highest court in the land, kind of, burying their heads in the sand and kind of saying, oh, this is all a procedural issue. But I get, like what that argument is saying. It's like, we're not saying that we're not going to rule on this ever, but just the way that it was filed doesn't it isn't something that we can look at. But
why can't we just codify it?
Oh, please go.
Max, what do you think about codifying it? I mean, we've got Democratic control in everything. So why can't we just codify Roe v. Wade?
It's a damn good question.
I mean, legislatively is a lot easier to undo, I think, was generally the thought. Max, I'd like your opinion, because your viewpoint represented a lot of what I had heard from liberal commentators this morning, which is, anger at the Supreme Court for not choosing to take this up and rule on it. But, kind of looking into a crystal ball, reading the court, isn't there a chance, had they chosen to take it up with a conservative-leaning court, that they could have ended up upholding it? Calling into question actually nationally the validity of Roe v. Wade versus something that this is a Texas issue that the state of Texas decided to implement. I mean, wasn't that one of the risks associated with it?
Probably. I mean, and I think that, the risk goes even broader than, whether or not they would uphold kind of the ban on abortion after 6 weeks, right? I mean, as Emily noted, although not necessarily in the terms that I would put it, right? I mean, I think that one of the most, shocking parts about this bill is that it essentially deputizes private citizens to be the enforcers of this law. Functionally, making, private citizens kind of bounty hunters who can bring lawsuits against apparently not people getting the abortions, but anyone who, quote, aids and abets them. That could even be the damn Uber driver who drives them to the clinic, also the kind of medical staff at that clinic. That is like there are two kind of horrifying things that the court would be ruling on here. One, the access to abortion and its connection to Roe and the constitutionality thereof. The other, right, this sort of I think, Emily said evil genius sort of plan, which is definitely how I would put it, right? That could have really big implications, not just for how people are policed for their attempts to seek safe abortions, but, if that is upheld, this could be, it could have really dire implications for how people are kind of enforcing public laws through private citizens, essentially taking people to court on mere suspicion, right? I mean, what other sort of law can we think that would be like an appropriate way to do that? I mean, this is like what I grew up hearing my right-wing parents saying, like, oh, that's what they do in Stalin's Russia, right? I mean, I'm going nuts here.
Interestingly enough, it's actually a legal strategy that was pioneered by environmental activists and is now being used on the right. And so I agree, actually. I think it does, it is a very slippery slope type precedent when you start popularizing and normalizing that kind of legal strategy. Now, as somebody who's pro-life, I think it is wonderful because it is a matter of life and death in this case. But I do completely agree. I agree on the issues of disparity, and I agree on all of that. But it is, I think, worth noting that it's really a legal strategy that was started it was pioneered by people who were using it for environmental ends.
Although the difference, though, was that was a way to allow people who came across environmental crimes to then to bring those forward in a civil court. But it wasn't going around a Supreme Court precedent. Like, in other words, there was no Supreme Court precedent that was saying you can't regulate the endangered species, or you can't regulate water quality. And so therefore environmentalists said, okay, aha, we got you. We're not gonna have the police, crack down on this. We're gonna have regular people crack down on it. But Emily, I'm curious, for decades, the Democrats have really comforted themselves by saying, and some moderate Republicans as well, by saying, these crazy Republicans, they're just saying that they want to ban abortion. They're just saying that to rile up their base, to get them to vote in midterms, to get them to donate, to get them to be part of this coalition, the interest of which is actually, the agenda of the Chamber of Commerce. Well, it turned out that that wasn't exactly the case, and that these so-called crazies had a mind of their own. And actually did plan on carrying through with what they said that they were going to do. Is this something that evolved over time? How is it that this element of the coalition became so powerful that it was able to kind of dominate the Chamber of Commerce wing?
That is a fantastic question. It's been really interesting because I actually bet there are some people at the RNC this morning who are really nervous about this because they're nervous about the political implications of it. Chamber of Commerce Republicans, I bet you are actually scared. And I think to your point, a lot of conservatives were completely accurate in their suspicions that this issue was being used by politicians over and over again to gin up the base, but there was not a lot of sincerity behind it. And if you actually asked them, when push comes to shove, would you want to see Roe overturned? In their private moments, they would say, well, no. And so it did evolve over time. Actually, it was, and this is the strangest thing in the world to say, it was the Trump moment in Republican politics that I think sort of finally put it front and center. A lot of conservatives would point to that moment in the debate with Hillary Clinton where Donald Trump said she wants to rip babies out of the womb as a moment that was like extremely galvanizing on the right because never had a Republican politician talked about it that way on such a major stage. And so the last half decade has been, I think, a particularly galvanizing one for the pro-life movement. Republicans saw that they could make it politically sort of palatable as an issue, that it wouldn't necessarily be the 2012 war on women fear that everyone is going to get turned into Todd Akin or whomever else. So the last half decade has actually been very, very important in this. And, I know we've been going on for a long time, but I would say this also does point to all of the concerns that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and other liberal legal critics have raised for years with Roe itself. Kim hit the nail on the head. I mean, if you want to avoid some of these issues, going through Congress is probably a better way to do it, even though the whims of the public and the way that breaks down in Congress would perhaps be a problem. You wouldn't get into some of these issues. So Roe itself has always been, I think, problematic, and this is the fruit of that.
I think one thing that, if I can say this before, I know we're running on time here, but one thing that I would stress for folks watching to kind of understand, I would stress that folks look into the history of this, right? Because public attitudes on abortion were not always what they are today, right? There is actually a documented history of how a right wing in American politics that had lost so much credibility for its economic policies in the Great Depression and in the post-war years latched on to the issue of abortion as a way to mobilize evangelical Christians as a voting bloc. And that actually worked. It bore out quite well. They were not the only voting bloc that Republicans were trying to mobilize, but it was effective right in the past decades. What that also meant was that you were kind of able to fuse, right, this sort of, Republican right-wing political economic apparatus to a sort of culture war issue that mobilized people, even if they were voting for a party that was not supporting their own class interests. And I think that it's important to kind of think about that in these terms today, right? I do agree with Emily that there probably are a lot of Republicans who don't want this to happen. One, because if you actually achieve it, then you no longer have that carrot to dangle at the end of the stick for a voting bloc that you constantly need to vote for you every couple years. But at the same time, fusing this sort of culture war issue, and it has become a culture war issue to, a party that needs that sort of voting bloc is one of the other kind of factors in this. And I think that we shouldn't discount that. There is a huge cynicism for a lot of people who say they are pro-life, but really don't give a crap one way or another and would get an abortion, if they had the chance.
Well, and while we do have to wrap, it'd be great to have you guys on in the future to talk about how we went from Hillary Clinton saying abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, 15 years ago, to today where many Democrats want abortion on demand up until the time of delivery. So how this is changed.
Not up until the time
close
of delivery.
to it. Look at Ralph Northam's comments. But yes, that's fair. But till well into viability, I should say. But we'll have to wrap there. Thank you both for your perspectives.
Thanks, guys.
All right, well, next on Rising, Corey Coe has been on the ground protesting the construction of the Line 3 pipeline through indigenous communities in Minnesota. They're going to be joining us next.